What if I told you that within a single minute, the axis of global politics tilted? That one man, standing before the most powerful leaders on earth, spoke a truth so daring, so precise, that it stunned entire governments into silence and ignited hope in millions worldwide. This is not a story of fiction, it is history in motion. In an era when world leaders often hide behind vague phrases and hollow diplomacy, one voice cut through with unflinching clarity. A voice that didn't roar, yet thundered across the globe. A voice that didn't plead for attention, but commanded respect. This isn't just the tale of a speech. It's the chronicle of a defining moment, one that rattled empires, elevated the unheard, and signaled the arrival of a rising power. A moment the world could not dismiss, and neither should you. Watch closely as we revisit the words that reshape the rules of engagement. Because sometimes, history turns not on wars or treaties, but on a single sentence. And this was that sentence. At a globally televised summit, under the glare of cameras and the scrutiny of international press, Dr. S. Jaishankar stood not merely as India's external affairs minister, but as the uncompromising voice of an emerging world, exhausted by selective morality and diplomatic doublespeak. In under 60 seconds, he delivered a statement so surgically crafted, so disarmingly precise, that it sliced through the noise of rehearsed speeches and empty formalities. His words weren't cloaked in anger. They carried the gravity of history, the sharpness of intellect, and the confidence of a nation unwilling to be patronized. In that instant, he wasn't just speaking for India. He spoke for every nation that for decades had endured one-sided lectures about democracy, rights, and world order, often from those whose deeds contradicted their words. The power of that statement wasn't in theatrics or volume. It was in the calm, unshakable declaration of truth. A truth that unmasked the double standards of powerful nations that defend their interests under one rule book, while forcing others to abide by another. And the setting was no ordinary forum. Whether at the UN, the G20, or a high-stakes strategic dialogue, the room was filled with policymakers, defense strategists, and leaders of nations that have historically dictated global norms. Yet, in those few piercing seconds, it was Jaishankar's voice that dominated headlines and echoed across diplomatic halls. He chose clarity over riddles, conviction over caution. He directly challenged the hypocrisy long tolerated as the cost of doing international business. He questioned how countries that preach peace continue to profit from wars they enable. His statement wasn't just a critique, it dismantled decades of unchallenged moral posturing. What made his approach unforgettable was its precision. He didn't need to call out names. The entire room, and millions watching online, already knew who he meant. The timing was flawless, the tone unapologetic, the message unmistakable. With a handful of words, he held up a mirror to those who draft rules for others while shielding themselves from accountability. He dared to expose the imbalance, the duplicity, and the silence that follows uncomfortable truths. This was not empty rhetoric, it was diplomacy with a backbone. While others fear upsetting powerful allies or jeopardizing economic ties, Jaishankar leaned into the discomfort. The world today is hyper-connected and hyper-aware. What was once buried in policy memos or closed-door negotiations now explodes across social media and global discourse. For decades, India's diplomacy was defined by restraint, non-alignment, and careful negotiation, often avoiding open confrontation. But in that moment, Jaishankar signaled a transformation. India no longer seeks approval. It asserts its place as an equal, firm, unapologetic sovereign. This shift was not spontaneous. It was years in the making, driven by evolving geopolitics, India's growing economic heft, and deliberate recalibration of foreign policy. His 60-second statement symbolized the culmination of that journey. India now views itself not as a bystander in global affairs, but as an architect shaping its future. His tone was firm without being combative, clear without being reckless. It rejected paternalism, refused to be cornered, and asserted India's priorities in a multipolar world. That declaration became more than one man's statement. It reflected a nation's awakening, a collective mindset done with appeasement, tired of hypocrisy, ready to engage the world on its own terms. Indian diplomacy graduated from polite persuasion to strategic assertion. In a global arena where smaller nations are often drowned out, Jaishankar's few words carried the weight of over 1 billion people. It made clear that India no longer seeks a symbolic seat at the table. It demands real influence. And from that moment on, the tone of Indian diplomacy changed irreversibly. When Jaishankar made his bold, no-nonsense remark on that world stage, its impact rippled far beyond the hall. While some diplomats sat stunned in silence, the global South heard a call to rise, reclaim dignity, and demand fairness. Across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, leaders recognized their own frustrations in his words. For too long, they've been trapped in a system built without their voices, lectured about equality by those who practice hierarchy. Jaishankar's sharp, fearless statement validated those sentiments. It signaled the birth of a new alignment, not around old colonial centers, but around shared realities of the present. And it did more than inspire, it gave confidence. Leaders who once self-censored in global forums began speaking more freely. They saw in India a model of how to confront power with balance and respect. The idea that you can challenge dominant narratives while remaining constructive was liberating. It opened space for long-suppressed conversations about justice, equity, and dignity, conversations too often silenced under the weight of diplomacy and dependency. This wasn't just India's moment, it was the global South's awakening. It encouraged nations to re-examine the strings attached to aid, to push for partnerships built on mutual respect rather than condescension, and to unify around shared struggles. Development, climate justice, and fair trade. Jaishankar's 60 seconds became more than a viral clip. It became a spark of solidarity, reshaping how emerging nations see themselves, their agency, and their leverage in global politics. And yes, it went viral. Within minutes, his statement was clipped, subtitled, and broadcast across the digital world. What began as a measured diplomatic response turned into a global soundbite dissected by analysts and celebrated by millions. Its brevity made it shareable. Its depth made it unforgettable. Audiences everywhere marveled at how one calm voice could puncture the fog of political correctness with unapologetic honesty. News channels called it a masterclass in diplomacy. Commentators labeled it a reset moment for global norms. On social media, it was everywhere. Memes, reaction videos, translations in dozens of languages. Younger audiences, many witnessing India's assertive voice for the first time, connected instantly. Influencers and foreign policy experts debated its implications not only for India, but for the global balance of power. The impact was amplified by the geopolitical climate. The world today is in flux, tensions in Europe, unrest in the Middle East, distrust in Western institutions, rising powers reshaping alliances. At a time when old frameworks are cracking, the world is hungry for fresh voices that offer clarity and fairness. Jaishankar's statement arrived at that exact moment. It wasn't just what he said, it was when he said it that made all the difference. As nations wrestle with war, inflation, energy crisis, and post-pandemic recovery, they are more open than ever to new ideas that challenge entrenched dominance. His words tapped into that hunger for change. And so, in just 1 minute, Dr. Jaishankar didn't just speak. He shifted the conversation. He redefined expectations. He reminded the world that diplomacy doesn't always need endless speeches or lengthy agreements. Sometimes, it only takes one unwavering voice to spark a movement. In a world drowning in narratives, he brought focus. In a room full of power, he brought purpose. In an age divided by suspicion, he brought a reminder dignity, sovereignty, and courage are not up for negotiation. Thank you for joining this journey. May these words push you to seek truth, stand tall, and speak boldly, even when the world is unprepared to listen. Stay informed, stay empowered, stay fearless.